Today on the Built for Growth podcast, I had Nick FREITAS, who I could describe as so many things, but I guess I'll start with the fact that he's a Green Beret and he served with the 1st Special Forces Group. He's elected into the House in 2015 and currently serves as the Committee of Education. And we talked about a few key points. We talked about what men need to hear. What do they need from us ladies? How can we better understand what men need in this day and age? We also talked about relationships, finding the one you love and keeping the one you love. What are some definitions to how to do that? And we also talked a little bit about politics. We talked a little bit about some ideologies and what all the different terms and meanings of the political stances that America is in and the difficulties we have in having hard conversations. So as always, thanks for listening.
Giveaway news. I did make a little mistake though, but it's actually going to work out better for you because I have a giveaway contest for a vintage Misha Tate signed shirt and an autograph photo. But here's why I went wrong. I got my dates confused and I posted that I'd announce a winner on today's podcast when it was actually supposed to be next Thursday's podcast. So I'm going to pick 2 winners, 2 vintage shirts and 2 autographs, one today and one next Thursday. So hang on and I'll tell you how you can be next to win. But right now, I want to congratulate Brat Brown 72. Your review was amazing and it really touched my heart. So head to MishaTate.com, click contact, then click the link Ask Misha a Question and ask me how I can send you your winnings and I'll get on it. Next week, I'll pick another winner. All you have to do is subscribe, share, and leave a written review on Apple Podcast. I'm hoping to make the new and noteworthy list, so your 5 stars really makes a difference as it helps more people find this podcast. Stay up to date with all future giveaways, like upcoming ones for Spotify and YouTube, by joining my newsletter at MishaTate.com.
Well, Nick, I am so excited to have you here today. And I was thinking about this. How am I going to start the intro to this podcast? And can I just be totally honest with you? I am not somebody who is starstruck by celebrities. It just doesn't, doesn't do anything for me. But people like you and Tim Kennedy,
oh, God.
I put you in that same category, and Matt Boudreau, and just people that maybe not everybody knows about, but you guys are just such needle movers, in my opinion. People that I aspire to be more like.
See, this is funny because when you reached out to me, I was like, Luke, look who wants to have us on. So Luke's my son, but no, so the feeling's very mutual.
Wait to dig into so many things. I do want to talk to you about relationship. You and your wife Tina have been together for how long?
25 years.
25 years. That's amazing.
Married 25.
Married 25. Yeah. And you were just teenagers when you got together?
We were 19. We were in high school when we got together, and then we were 19 and 20 when we got married.
I love it. That's it's a beautiful story. So I want to dive into that with you, and I want to dive into with relationships, how it works, and also just the struggles of being a man in the relationship. I'm curious to get into that with you, what the difficulties are, because I would like to better understand that. We do hear a lot about the struggles for women and what we go through, but I'm genuinely curious on the other side. But before that, our world seems like it's in shambles, at least from an American perspective.
Sure.
And I know that you have so much great insight, and I want to learn from you about just the political side and how it came to be, or how, in your opinion, it possibly came to be that we feel like such a nation divided. Yeah. And I'm not even truly believing that we are all that divided. I think some of this is propaganda. I think some of it is fabricated. I think, there are even bots and things that have been put on social media to antagonize and go after people to make us feel like we're at such different ends of the spectrum. But I think that the core of America is still intact. I believe that. However, how did we get to a point where it is hard to have a conversation with someone who opposes maybe your political stance or doesn't see eye to eye, but we can't even talk about it. Like, this is not allowed. It's being banned. It's being, reprimanded. It's being, on social media. I mean, these things are being suppressed in certain ways. So I'm very curious to think, but how did we possibly end up in this position?
That is so let me see if I can. I'll give you my opinion, right? And my opinion, and $6 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So I've worked in two interesting worlds with respect to this question. The first world I worked in was Army Special Forces. So my job was unconventional warfare and counterinsurgency. I mean, there's like 7 core tasks as a Green Beret, but those two really kind of define what's unique about SF. And what that means is we were either responsible for helping the rebels overthrow the country, or we were responsible for helping the government defeat the rebels. Those were our two jobs. A good example of this is early days in Afghanistan, Green Berets working with the Taliban, working with the Northern Alliance to overthrow the Taliban. Early days of Iraq, we overthrew the government, but then we worked with the government to put down Al-Qaeda and other militias that were coming over from Iran, et cetera. So why do I mention that? Because I studied a lot on how do you undermine a country and a culture, how do you try to find ways to work with different people in order to come to common mission sets or common objectives. And I always joke that nothing prepared me more for domestic politics than having a background in unconventional warfare and counterinsurgency, because I also serve in a state legislature. So I'm in the House of Delegates in Virginia. Next year will be my 10th year down there. So I've got a little bit of time in that space as well. And what I will tell you is that from the first year I went into the General Assembly, which was 2016, to now, it feels like a very, very different place. None of this happened overnight. A lot of this was gradual and over time, but I think a lot of it stems from, there was a lot of things that used to divide Americans, a lot of things that we used to disagree on. But there was a certain set of core philosophies that, for better or for worse, most Americans agreed with. We agreed in the concept of not just representative government, but we agreed with things like federalism, right? There's a proper role for the federal government, there's a proper role for the state government, there's a proper role for the localities, and they should kind of stay out of each other's lanes. We agreed that, the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature all need to be separate entities, that we shouldn't be, the executive should not be exercising legislative powers, the judiciary should not be, like all of that. But then that's just system of government piece. There was another core philosophy, and you kind of find this in the Declaration of Independence, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And we generally agreed that those things like property rights and personal responsibility and self-determination, that these were good things, that these were positive moral things, and that the United States, with all of our flaws throughout history and with all the flaws of our founders, were on the whole objectively good. We don't think that way anymore. And the problem is that if you don't agree, if you don't have a common history that you can all appeal to and point to and say, yes, we feel that this was good, if not perfect, and that it was trying to become better. And if you don't have a common core set of beliefs on what the proper role of the individual is, or the family is, or the government is, now you start to enter into a world where large portions of the country have diametrically opposed worldviews on what the role of government is. The more left-leaning side of the political spectrum believes that the government should play a much larger role within our lives, that they believe that this is the appropriate thing to do, that I'm not trying to make them out to be evil, right? I'm just trying to say that if I was going to argue this from the leftist perspective, it would be, well, of course, we need a bureaucracy and experts, and those experts are going to be the ones that inform us on how to do things the best, whether it's raising our food or raising our children, or dealing with a pandemic or whatever else it might be. Well, the other side of that is, well, no, the government has a role to play, but it's supposed to be limited, it's supposed to be enumerated, and we're supposed to maximize individual liberty. But the only way you can do that is by also maximizing personal responsibility. So we don't believe that the government's supposed to come in and help you out every time you screw up or you do something wrong. Family can do that, church can do that, charity can do that, but not the government. Well, whenever you get to this point where all of a sudden, no, I do want the government to help manage the economy, and I do want the government to be primarily responsible for education, and I do want the government to be primarily responsible for your health care and whatever else it is, against another side that says, no, I believe that those are that's antithetical to individual freedom and whatnot. Those two can't coexist, right? So I would like to believe that the core of America is still very sound with respect to what Americans want. I don't believe it anymore.
Okay.
I just don't. And it's not that I don't think we can't get back to that, but I will say this, when it comes to what I see a lot of people advocating for, I can't go along with it. I can't submit to it. And because for me, this isn't just an argument about policy, it's ultimately an argument about morality. And the biggest example I use when I talk to somebody that identifies as a socialist. Socialism is the abolition of the private ownership of the means of production. People say, no, that's not, no, that is what it is. Go look it up. That is what it is. And what I always tell them is say, if you want to live as a socialist in the United States of America right now, you can do it. You can go get your friends together. You can buy a bunch of property. You can set up industries. You can own those industries collectively. You can do all of that. There's no law preventing you from doing that. But you can't make me come with you, and you can't make me pay for it. And their response to that is, well, that's not good enough. You need to be made to do it. Okay, well, if my worldview says you're free to live as you want, but you just can't force me to come along with you, and your worldview says that I have to come along with you and I will be made to do it, I'm going to fight you. Mm-hmm. And I want to fight that battle civilly through discussion and through education and debate. And insofar as we can adjudicate things through the civil process within politics, I would love to do that. But if that doesn't work, you're not forcing me to do this. And so that's where you get to a point where, okay, how bad do you want it? Because I know how bad I will not be ruled. Like I know what my commitment is on that. So you can either live the way you want to live and let me do the same, mm-hmm. or we can fight. And I don't want to fight. I know what war looks like. I don't want to bring it to my own shores, but by the same token, I'm not raising my kids in a country where they're managed by a bureaucracy.
How close do you think we are from getting on the end of socialism as a country here?
Interestingly enough, if you, there's a lot of people that will say they're socialists, and I feel like they think of that as more of like a colloquial term. They just mean they're neighborly, or they just mean, well, of course we should share the wealth. Of course we should help one another. Okay, well that's not socialism.
Correct.
Right?
That's
not
like
socialism.
That's like democracy, kind of like in a way, right? Or
well,
no? Would you say it's different?
It used to be referred to more of like social democracy. It was the idea that we're still going to. So, for instance, Nordic countries have a high welfare state. The government does run certain things, but there's still free enterprise. Here's what's interesting about that. That sort of economic system is not strictly socialist. The economic system that best reflects is fascism. So,
okay, explain to me fascism.
So fascist economic policy was rooted in this idea that they would allow for minimal private ownership of industry, but it had to operate in accordance with what the body politic wanted. Well, who decided what the body politic wanted? The government. And so governments in Italy, in Spain, and in Germany essentially said, as long as you're willing to run your businesses the way we want, and as long as you're willing to make production quotas that the government gives you, we'll allow you to own it. The moment you don't do those things, we'll take it over and we'll nationalize it. Well, that's the socialist component side of it. So what I see a lot of people on the left now advocating for is they want a great deal more government control over certain industries that they might consider to be critical. And then sure, you can run your coffee shop. We don't care, about your coffee shop. But the problem is that, again, when the government is setting all of the rules for how you can run your coffee shop, and the moment you don't run it the way they want, either through taxes, fees, fines, many of which will get levied without a single vote in Congress or your state legislature, they can shut you down, or they can come after you legally for minor violations if they don't like something else you're doing. Well, whenever the government has that much control over the economy, that's, again, you're running into that other side of the spectrum. And so I don't mean to say that anybody that wants that kind of economy is a fascist, because fascism is a difficult term and it's certainly a loaded one for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. Fascist regimes were horrible. But I do find it interesting that the same people that are sometimes screaming the loudest about fascism are advocating for economic policies that fall very, very neatly into anything you would read out of the Italian Fascist Manifesto. So
what would be an example of fascism gone wrong?
Well, I mean, the first and most
Yeah.
popular case of fascism was Italy under Benito Mussolini in the 20s and 30s. Obviously, the Nazis were considered fascist, but Nazi actually stood for National Socialist Workers' Party. And then Franco in Spain was also considered fascist, although there was a lot of differences. So some of the attributes generally associated with fascism are things like extreme nationalism. That's one of the reasons why so many people think fascism is a right-wing philosophy.
Right.
But then when you look at their economic policies and whatnot, you would actually find a lot more in common with what we would consider to be the left in this country. And so it's been difficult to put fascism in a category of right or left, because there's certainly components of it, and not all fascism was inherently racist, right? Nazism was obviously very, very racist, right? Italian fascism, not so much. So
Right.
But again, part of the problem that we have right now in politics when we discuss these issues is we have terms that people automatically associate with good or bad.
Correct.
And then we just use those terms against people to categorize them like, oh, you're this.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment you're this, I no longer have to listen to you. I no longer have to consider what you have to say because you're Hitler now. It's like, well, no, just because somebody wants a different immigration policy doesn't mean they're naturally evil or racist. It could be that they're dealing with very significant economic and educational consequences of a particular policy.
Mm-hmm.
But again, in politics, much of politics is marketing,
Right.
and that's a shame.
Well, it makes me think about the situation with the border,
Mm-hmm.
because my personal stance on that is that people have to enter the country legally.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm all for people being able to come here and pursue the American dream.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother came over on a boat when she was 3 years old from
Mm-hmm.
Switzerland. I mean, technically my heritage, and I think a lot of people, come from outside of this country
Mm-hmm.
because America was great and a lot of people came here as immigrants. But I don't believe with not having consequences for crossing in any which way that you want illegally, and us having to, to financially support that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Now there's two ways I can look at that, right? I can say, okay, well, Misha has her own experience and she's obviously not anti-immigrant. She just thinks there should be a legal process by which people come into the country. Or I could say, Misha's actually a deep-seated racist. And what Misha really means by that is she doesn't mind if immigrants like her grandmother, who was Swiss and white, come over, but she doesn't want these other people that don't look like her. And that's the real reason. Now, the moment you say, no, that has nothing to do with it, it's this. If I've convinced myself in my mind that this is the most effective way to argue for my policy, if my policy is open borders, then it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to look at your particular argumentation and say, well, okay, I get that, but here's the argument for open borders. It makes more sense in the current climate to just say, no, you're just a bad person. Mm-hmm. Because if I can convince anybody listening to that you're actually just a closeted racist, mm-hmm. well, who listens to a closeted racist? Who wants to hear and I certainly don't want to be associated with a closeted racist. And so this ends up becoming
a moral. Yeah, I mean, where they make the moral attributes that you have look so bad.
Yes.
That you end up not hearing what the argument is. And I feel like this is a big problem right now with the presidency. Mm-hmm. I feel like, with Trump and Harris, a lot of people who feel one way or the other are looking at the person. Mm-hmm. And I try to look at the policy. Mm-hmm. And try to think more about what are the concepts that these people are bringing. If I didn't put a name or a face to either one of them, mm-hmm. I just want to look at what this says on paper and what policy do I align with more, because I'm trying to take out the other things. Like I don't, again, I'm for live how you want to live. Mm-hmm. I want you to be happy and prosperous in America. Mm-hmm. I want you to have the American dream. I want you to, have the right to, if you are gay, if you're a lesbian, if you're transgender, like I want everybody to be able to coexist in peace. I don't want to tell anybody how they should live their life. Mm-hmm. But I think I try to look at that and say, look, I'm going to take as much bias out of this as possible. I'm going to say, like, what are the policies that will help my family prosper? Because first and foremost, I'm going to care about my family and how my children are going to do in a future economy, but I care about all the kids. Like if I could save all the kids in the whole world, like if I could
Sure.
save the kids from being trafficked, if I could, like if I could make a difference in that way, which I hope to someday, I don't want any children to be abused. Like I love all children. And there's like such a small degree of separation between my children and other children.
There's a quote by Thomas Sowell that I really love. Thomas Sowell, I think, is one of the most brilliant contemporary, not just economists, but just thinkers in general. I love the way he discusses things, the way he thinks about things. But he said that one of the reasons why so many politicians are such shameless liars, or the way that he does the quote is, the reason why so many politicians are such shameless liars is not just a reflection on them, it's a reflection on us. Because when people start to demand things that the government cannot possibly produce, then only liars can satisfy. And the problem is that if I lie to you about what's best for you, and maybe I have a very genuine call to try to address the same problem, but I've either misdiagnosed the problem or I've offered the wrong solution to it. Well, now there's a different incentive structure, because if I'm in power and I've got to do the things I want to do and they're not working, well, now I'm forced with a decision, right? I either got to be a little bit more introspective and think, why is this not working? Maybe I thought about this wrong. Okay, well, that's not rewarded in politics. You're going to be voted out because you were wrong, and that makes sense. Or I can come up with a reason why it didn't work. It's not that what I did was wrong. It's not that what I believe is wrong. It's that there's nefarious forces out there that are preventing it from actually working, and so we have to punish anybody that fits within that category of those nefarious forces that's preventing my noble and wonderful policy from taking place. But here's the problem. We don't debate policies as much as we debate
character and people.
Well, not even that. It's desired outcomes. I got in a debate with a delegate in Virginia once, and he was very upset that we had said something, about socialism that they didn't like. And so he goes off on a speech talking about socialism is wanting everybody to have a fair shake at the economy. Socialism is wanting people to not die without health care. Socialism is wanting every child to get an education. And I got up and I said, those are desired outcomes of pretty much every political philosophy I know. You didn't list a policy. You list desired outcomes and then you conflated it with policy. So now that if I say I don't like socialism, apparently I don't want kids to be educated and I want old people to die. Right. Well, that's very convenient. But how do you plan to actually do this? And another thing Thomas Sowell always talked about was the idea that politicians don't deal in solutions. They deal in trade-offs. And in fact, we all do. That's what we're doing. Every time you make a choice to do one thing, you do it at the expense of the other thing that you could have been doing. And so when you have a vision of the world that recognizes a couple of things, which is, human nature is amazingly similar across space and time. No matter where you go, no matter what period of history you're looking at, politics changes, certain theories or ideas about civilization change or society change, but the urges that we have as human beings, that stays remarkably similar. Not to mention the fact that while we believe that we're all created, like I believe we're created equal in the eyes of God, which is to say that we all have inherent worth as human beings. I believe that we should all be equal before the law, that regardless of your race, who you worship, your skin color, your economic status, I don't believe that the law should apply differently to you. I think those are, but we all know that none of us are equal in practical terms. I am not equal to LeBron James on the basketball court, right? It's, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing inherently immoral or evil about that. It's just a reality. And so if all of us have different ideas and talents and visions for what it means to pursue happiness, then a society which says, we're going to let you out there and pursue your life, and we're going to try to keep you safe, not from your own decisions, but we're going to kind of do crime and invasion and things like that. But then you're going to figure out what you're good at, and you're going to figure out how to build a life for yourself, and you're going to do it. Or I can say, no. If you have less, that must be because of some sort of nefarious evil force that has exploited you, and you're oppressed, and the people that exploited you are oppressors. And if you vote for me, I'm going to take things from those oppressors and I'm going to give them to you because it's rightfully yours. And not only is this an okay thing to do, it's good for your family, right? That's why when people say of course all of us are going to do what's right for our family. But the question is, is there any underlying moral reasoning behind this? Is there any underlying moral laws like that we're all still agreed upon? If you take from me to give to somebody else, does that make you noble? I don't know. Like if I
who's deciding who those
right.
oppressors are?
Yeah.
And where's the motive in that?
Well, and increasingly, what we've been told is that you're an oppressor based off of things you had absolutely no control over. You're an oppressor because of things that happened 20 years ago or 50 years ago or 200 years ago. Mm-hmm. And because one ancestor did one thing to another ancestor, you're now ultimately responsible for it. That is not a game you can actually play, because the farther you go back in civilization, the more you realize that everybody has done this to everybody throughout millennia. So the question is the best way to recognize that, to educate people on it, and then to say, and we don't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. Right? Go out there and you live your life. You're responsible for your actions, and this person's responsible for their actions. But my job as a member of the government is to not be trying to buy your vote by what I steal from this person over here and give to you. And just because, and you may say, well, wait a second, but I really need it and that person doesn't. Does that make it okay for me to steal from somebody who has earned something to give it to somebody who has not earned that thing? Because if we can't agree on some of these like basic moral premises, mm-hmm. well then now every politician is now incentivized to find the group of people that they're going to help at the expense of others and to try to build that group up. And then what ends up happening is one group of people become my voters, my power base, and everybody else is someone that I exploit in order to make sure that they stay happy.
Right.
I don't think any of us want to live in a country like that. I don't. But that is inevitably what you will get to when you give the government this much power over our lives. And it's not because we don't want people to, it's not because we don't want sick people to have health care. It's not because we don't want kids to be educated. But if the government's the one running these institutions, well, then the government will ultimately be in a position to say who gets what and why. And more we're going to find it's not for some sort of objective moral reason, because we got rid of those. Mm-hmm. It's going to be for very utilitarian reasons based off of whoever's in power. And that's a very dangerous environment to be in.
You know, you said something that made me think about the every kid gets a trophy. And I'll tell you right now, I am not pro every child gets a trophy. No. And this is the reason why. It's not because I don't think children are deserving for effort. Mm-hmm. I absolutely do. Mm-hmm. And I could see meeting in the middle. Maybe every child gets something. However, I think it is important for children to be able to distinguish what they are great at mm-hmm. and what their calling is. And I think that if you equalize it to a point where this child truly believes they are just, I'm going to use just sports, just as good at running as they are at wrestling, as they are at basketball, as they are as football, they may never really find their true calling, because it's hard as a child to understand what, even as an adult, mm-hmm. it is sometimes difficult to find, which path you're going to take. And especially if you take out the clear signs like, hey, I was never a basketball player. Mm-hmm. I figured that out early and young. I wasn't great at it. It's okay. I'm okay with that. Yeah. Basketball will never be my sport. I appreciate mm-hmm. that I know what I don't know and what mm-hmm. I'm not well at, so that I could find something that I could be a world champion at. Yeah. And that belt means something to me, because not everybody has that belt. Because at one point in the world, I was one of one. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And that feels good, because I worked so damn hard for that mm-hmm. for the large part of my life. And I think that if we give every child a trophy, that these children at a young, impressionable age will not really understand the value and what they're great at, finding what they're talented at.
It is an excellent way to put it. So much of the problem that we have in politics right now is not people mad at one side or the other because they don't care enough, or they don't. It's because one side honestly believes that they can fundamentally alter reality through public policy in a way that it is one thing to alter circumstances. It is another thing to alter outcomes in a particular way. You can't alter fundamental reality. And they believe they can. They believe that, well, no, the reason why people look up to the belt, right? The reason why they do that is because you've been socially engineered to do so. And if we just change the social factors, well, then you wouldn't look up to it. You would see it as just as good. Okay, when has that ever worked? Every time they've tried to make this work, people are miserable. And then the end result is that the people that this was supposed to help, that are living in the countries that have tried to push this overtly egalitarian principle, try to leave. Because I don't care how much you tell kids, oh, we're not keeping score, it's just about fun. What are the little kids in Minnesota? Who won? They want to know who won. From the time my kids were little, I remember there was one time, my son Luke's here with me, and they won a game, but Luke did not pull his weight. This is Pee-wee stuff, right? But he did not pull his weight. And he goes, how'd I do? I said, you didn't do well. But we won. I said, buddy, you were off running around picking flowers, dude. Like you were not. This is really young, right?
Yeah.
I said, you weren't helping your team. You weren't there when your team needed you. Your team won in spite of the fact that you weren't helping. And so that's not something to feel good about. And then there was another game he went to, and he was out there, man. He was hustling his little heart out, right? He was just doing his, and they lost, and he was really down. I said, buddy, you did your job. You came through, and it's disappointing not to win. Winning's better, right? Winning's better. But you did your job. And so the goal of that was not to say that it's all about winning and effort doesn't mean anything. The goal was not to say that it's all about effort and winning doesn't mean anything. The goal was to establish that effort's important, because effort is the thing that generally leads to victory. And victory is not a bad thing because it's excluding the people that lost. What it does is it gives us something to shoot for, that even when we fall short of it, we're better off for having the thing to shoot for.
Yeah.
And you're not going to fundamentally alter that. And the moment you try to, the moment you think you're going to create some sort of wonderful egalitarian space by telling somebody you can do anything you put your mind to. No, you can't. No, you can't. Right?
So true.
Sorry.
The fact of the matter is.
Sorry. And you're going to be miserable going through life, and you're going to ultimately come to the conclusion that,
the world must be against me.
If all of the authority figures in my life, and my parents and my teachers and everyone else told me that I can do anything I put my mind to, and I put my mind to it, and I fail, it must be something wrong with society. It must be something wrong with the world. Well, the world ain't changing. So here's the deal. It is so much better, you articulated it beautifully, it is so much better to provide people an open and free space to where they can find out what they are truly good at and then become the best they can be in that, instead of trying to be, the best in something that they will always be mediocre in. And I don't think, and this is the part that we need to change it about, it's not just about, well, this is the hard practical reality. No, this is a moral reality. Telling somebody that they can accomplish something that they just can't. And I don't mean putting someone down at the beginning of their journey because it's difficult. I mean creating...
Oh yeah, because there were plenty of people who told me I could never fight, and
And
because
you
I'm
did
a
it.
woman and wrestled and all these things. So
Exactly.
yes, there's a balance to this concept.
There's a total... The way we used to describe it for our kids is we didn't tell our kids, don't follow your dreams.
Right.
What we told our kids was, dreams are wonderful, but dreams themselves don't feed you, and dreams themselves are not accomplishments. And so in order to get through life, there's a couple of things that you have to come to grips with. The first thing is, you are responsible for you. Nobody else is responsible to make your dreams come true. That is not, because if they're responsible for making your dreams come true, what you're really saying is, you have to put your dreams on hold to make my dreams come true. That's selfish. It's not egalitarian. So you're responsible. You also got to feed yourself. So you got to ask yourself, is the thing I dream about going to be able to feed me? If the answer is no, don't give up on it. Just recognize you're going to have to do something else in order to take care of yourself while you pursue that dream. And that's fine as long as you remember it's on you to accomplish. And if other people come alongside and help, which is almost always necessary to reach like that peak level, that's wonderful, and give them the praise and show gratitude and appreciation for it. But if you don't make it there, you don't get to blame everybody else. And I find that when we raise kids with a sense of personal responsibility combined with hope, well, now they can pursue dreams in an effective manner that's not only good for them, but it's good for the rest of us. Because we all like it when people excel.
Yeah.
I want to live in a world where when my neighbor does better than me, I celebrate with them. I don't think, man, they owe me something. Because I've never seen anybody apply that sort of mentality to their life and end up better for it.
Oh, and to be happy? No.
Oh, they end up miserable.
Yeah, miserable.
Even when they get the stuff they think they want.
Right. Because there's also a sense of fulfillment that you get when you do something hard and difficult and you make your way in it. And there's going to be obstacles, there's going to be failures, there's going to be things that those speed bumps and roadblocks and things that throw you, the wrench in the mix, but that is what is so much more rewarding, I think, about getting to the top. And to your point, I think honest accountability and effort are two things that I've really changed in the latter part of my career. I think the ability to have honest accountability is a big part of what made me who I am. And
what do you mean by that?
So what I mean by it is that what you were talking about is like placing blame in other places, or being able to say, you know what, this is truly, unbiased aside, what I need to be responsible for and how I have to navigate that. And that also means that as an athlete, I have to be ready to be honest with myself at all times. I have to be ready to have accountability at all times. But that doesn't mean that I always have to give 100 out of 100 every single day. Because honest accountability looks something like this. I show up on Monday and I feel great. I'm going to give 100%. I show up on Tuesday and I feel like maybe I'm getting a cold, maybe I'm sick, maybe something else. I've got 50% today. Do I show up and give 100%? A lot of athletes do. You know what happens is we dig a hole, we get sick, we get injured, and nobody's there to look out for you as an athlete or as a person otherwise if you continually are not honest with where you are at. So a lot of times it applies actually when we don't have everything to give. Because if you show up every day and you give everything that you have, more than you have to give on those days, you end up hurting yourself in the long run. And that's what I did. I dug a hole for myself. It's the reason that I retired. I was at such a deficit mentally, emotionally, and physically that I didn't have anything else to give. And I contemplated taking my own life at that point.
Wow.
And it was a really dark place. And I just realized that I had been burning the candle at both ends and the middle because I didn't stop to be honest with myself. I didn't stop to say, Misha, you're not okay. Misha, you don't have that to give today. No, it was, you got to show up and you got to give it always, every time, because that's what champions do. That's what successful people do. And there's an element of truth to that, but 100% is always 100%. If I give what I honestly have to give, I will always be giving 100%, but 100% each day will look different. So being accountable in that and not making up excuses, right? This is where it can get on the other side. Well, I just don't feel like it today. Well, that doesn't work. You know what I mean? If it's an honest accountability, then you know what you have to give every day. But I didn't have a balance in that. I didn't understand how to do that. And I really hurt myself in that process. And then I think also switching to effort-based. That is really difficult to do as an athlete. I imagine it's difficult to do as a person. But not putting so much weight on the outcome of win or loss, but putting the weight on how hard and how much effort I put into it. So in my last fight, I think it was absolutely the best performance I've ever had in my career. And it wasn't a world title. It wasn't a big fight for many other people, but I know what was going on up here. And for the first time in my life as a professional athlete, winning was not the objective. Being my best was the objective. And what I realized is similar to what you said, is when I am at my best, I'm much more likely to win. But if I make winning my objective, I actually can diminish my best because I might play it safe. I might say, you know what? I'm winning right now and that's the goal and I'm giving a 6 out of 10. That's all I need to give. I'm here. I'm just going to stay. I'm not going to go for, to show my best or test myself. Like, no, I'm going to play it. I'm going to do just what I need to win. And I have done that a lot in my career and I know I held myself back. And this was the first fight when I said, I actually am not going to put on the win or loss as the main objective. And in my mind, I was kind of saying to myself, I don't care if I win or I lose. I mean, that's not exactly true, but it's kind of the feeling that I had to accept that, look, I might lose by trying to be my best. And I have to be okay with that. Because if I ever want to know how great I can be, I have to be okay with accepting loss.
I think, that's beautiful. Because I think it's true. I think, again, when we talk about winning being important, of course it is. But winning is still something of an objective standard out here.
Correct.
Which means, and like you said, if I can achieve the win without being my best, is that the same as being my best? And the answer is no.
Right, and is it the same as being your best and losing? Because that's a realistic possibility too. If you go out there and you try to be your best and you take a you try to take a risk and you end up in a loss for it, how do we deal with those things? And then it comes back again to the honest accountability. Did I do the best that I could? Yes. Can I walk away from a loss and still feel good?
Yeah.
Is that possible as an athlete? Or do we have to define our worth on what everyone else deems as the most important thing?
I've noticed in the things that I've done that, where I've been like, okay, I got the win, or I got this, or I got that, where I knew I didn't put everything that I really should have. There's still that feeling of there's still a feeling of loss associated 100%. With it. So no, I think that's true, and it's something that we got to constantly remind ourselves of. Like the moment you said it, I was like, gosh, dang, that's true. Yeah, I got to start applying that toward this and this, because it does get easy to be like, well, I got the thing, right? The thing was the thing, right? I was struggling with this where I would have people you come by my office or whatnot, and be like, oh, well, Nick, you Green Beret, right? Ranger tab, or sniper school, and like, nobody wants to mess with you. Like, am I really still that guy? Are those still capabilities that help define what I am, or are they now stories that I tell about a guy that isn't here anymore? And that gets hard. And it's one of the things that got me back into. It's one of the things that got me back into working out. It's one of the things that got me back into sparring and things like that. Where it's okay, I'm not expecting to be the 27-year-old version of me, but I'd like to be the best 45-year-old version of me. And I'm not ready to rest on past achievement and say, okay, that was it. When somebody says, oh, I still want some of the capabilities associated with those things to be true of me. Yes. And if I want them to be true of me, well, then I have to continue to fight to make it so. Not because I'm going to get, not because I'm going to get called up to lead a patrol anymore, right? Not because I'm going to be the first on the stack going in the house to clear rooms and stuff like that. Not necessarily because I'm going to be that anymore, but because I still want to be capable. And when you do that mind shift of like, no, I'm not. It's not about beating that guy or doing this over here or achieving. It's about me knowing that if I had to do this, I could do it.
That's personal growth.
Yeah.
And that's really, it comes all the way back to that. What is your effort? What is the honest accountability? What do you want to bring to the table? What are your goals? How do you get there? And how do we not rest on the merits?
It's exciting thinking of it about that way. Like there's so many things I think about with my own kids. We homeschooled. So there's so many things I think about my own kids' education where I wish I would have focused more on, okay, what is the capability that we're developing? Because I've always been excited to develop new capabilities. Whereas sometimes where it's like, well, no, I have to achieve this thing. Okay, yeah, maybe, but it's exciting to think about, like, I can now do things that I wasn't able to do before. And I know I think it's totally missing from a lot of our education system as well, too. It's like, oh, I passed the test.
Don't get me
I
started.
got this score. Like, okay, but what do you know? What does that knowledge do for you? How is it practically relevant? How is it personally relevant? How is it relevant to your community?
Well, I think standardized testing is just convenient for the people in the authority position to be able to look at a piece of paper and say you know or you don't. But it is not an authentic or genuine test of the person and their skill set, in my opinion. And they create a lot of anxiety, like standardized testing. I don't feel like it's always an accurate. Well, it's not always an accurate assessment of how well people know or the things that are actually important.
Yeah, I think there's. I'll put it this way. I think there is limited merit to standardized testing. Because there are some things within our lives that kind of are standardized, and you either know how to do it or you don't. You either have the knowledge or you don't. And so there's some limited utility to that. But to your point, I think we've grown to rely on it far too much. And the other thing that I think is problematic, and this is true of both boys and girls, I think it is especially true of young boys though, is that we've created learning conditions, educational conditions, where the system is set up to benefit the system more than it is the child. And you know this because when the child doesn't flourish within the system, we medicate the child or we do something different with the child. And this is not to say that we haven't tried to alter things within like public education or whatnot. But it's more about understanding that all the things we've talked about, so when you talk about personal growth, That is what education is supposed to be about, is personal growth.
Yeah.
Well, whenever you take something that is ultimately personalized and individualized, and you attach a mass production model toward it, you're going to get mass produced results. And if you don't fit into that little mass produced, well, then you're the problem. It's no longer something where maybe that thing that is causing you to just lose your mind in a classroom 6 hours a day, maybe that thing that is a problem in that classroom all of a sudden becomes an advantage when it's put in a different environment.
Right.
But
then you have to ask too, is the problem the child or is it the environment?
Yeah.
And I don't think that question gets asked enough, because it's like, if you don't fit this environment, which who in their right mind could say that every child at certain points should be on the same level of development at exactly the same time and fit the exact same situation? That my son and daughter, same mom and dad, same, totally different people.
Yeah.
Totally different. So I could never sit and say that the same environment that supports my daughter would be the best environment to support my son as well. I do get a bit discouraged about children getting, I think, overdiagnosed and over-medicated when it's not the child's fault.
Yeah.
It is what is being asked of the child that's just not realistic for their best.
Well, and look, reasonable people could differentiate between a child that is just being like horribly unruly. Discipline is important, right? And discipline
Structure,
early on
discipline,
is
absolutely.
very important for kids. I'm not saying otherwise. But again, this goes, and this kind of goes, it kind of goes into both categories. One, the personal growth component, and also kind of what's the problem with politics and everything else within our country. I think a big problem does stem from this idea that we have increasingly treated all of us, because most of us went through this system, is that's what you are. You are an element within the system, and if you don't work well within that system, you're the problem. It's not that system wasn't designed with you in mind. It's not that system really cares about what your overall objectives or goals, or understands the conditions in which you're interacting with the system. You're the problem. And that makes sense actually within the system they've created. But since when are we not allowed to ask, is that really the best way to do this then? If it's, let's say it's working for 60% of the population, great. Then let 60% of the population do that. Why do we need to shove 100% of the population into that? Oh, well, now you hate teachers.
Yeah.
No, I don't hate teachers. You just don't want poor people to be educated.
No,
the opposite is true. I just don't think this works for it.
Yeah.
But whenever you create systems which benefit from the way the system exists, they will fight to make sure the system doesn't change in ways they don't want it to. And but I don't know how we got into that.
I don't think, no, that's great. I don't think that the public school system is set up for critical thinking. And I think a lot of what we're doing right now is a bit more on the critical thinking side. I would say a lot more than a bit. But how do you think we can foster more critical thinking at home with our children? Especially, there's a lot of parents who are not going to be able to, maybe even they want to. They love their children. They'd love to be able to homeschool. They can't. You got to work, right? Just what you're talking about. You got to find a way to make a means, so they send their kids to public school. So, what is your maybe best piece of advice? You've raised 3 children. You've had a long, successful marriage.
I get along with all my kids.
Yeah.
The one thing I will tell people is that, to the extent homeschooling or let's say schooling options outside homeschooling, people have a vision of homeschooling where it's just mom and dad, or just mom, managing the entire education of their children. That is not what homeschooling is. Yes, the mom is typically, like in our family, Tina did the vast majority of the work on the homeschooling. So she helped manage that, but that's what she was doing. She was helping to manage an educational process. She wasn't micromanaging it. Like, there was all sorts of resources that we use, and we use co-ops, and we use tutors, and we use different curriculums and online curriculums, and so there's all sorts of resources out there. So I would tell you that anybody that is deliberately trying to intimidate you out of doing this probably has an agenda. So don't listen to that. Make your own decision for yourself on whether or not it's best for you. But at the very least, what I would do is, when your kids are little, like very little, obviously there isn't a whole lot of dialogue, right? Like, don't do that. Why? Because mommy or daddy said so. it's dangerous, and they can't comprehend why it's completely dangerous, and so I get that. But the moment your kids start questioning, and I know this could be like just drive you nuts, especially if you're tired or you're whatnot, there are times where it's perfectly appropriate to say, no, it's bedtime, right? I love this one meme I saw where it's like all of a sudden, whenever it's bedtime, my kids turn into thirsty philosophers that want to hug, right? Yeah. And it's like, no, it's again, part of the discipline and structure is now's not the time for that, go to bed. Mm-hmm. But there needs to be some time for it. And one of the things I really appreciate is obviously we were very involved in politics when my kids were young. And so they heard a lot of discussions going on about a variety of issues and philosophically, how do we think about this, and from a policy perspective and from a practical application perspective. And every once in a while I would hear my kids regurgitate something that they had heard me say. And they said it with this confidence like it was theirs. And I would stop and be like, why do you think that? Oh, well, I heard you say, I didn't ask where you heard it. I know where you heard it. Why do you think that? Do you think that's true? Why do you think that's true? And I said, no, you're not in trouble, but let's talk about this, because I agree with that statement, but I want to know you understand it. I don't want you to just win brownie points by repeating what you think mom and dad want to hear. So I think step one is challenge your kids on the beliefs that you've raised them up with in a way to actually have that back and forth conversation and to like really test critical thinking. Mm-hmm. Another thing I would tell parents that I've found I've just found this enormously useful, is ask your kids, like when your kids are explaining relationship dynamics within their friend group, relationship dynamics tell us a lot about how the world works. And asking, so-and-so did this or so-and did that. Why do you think they did that? Mm-hmm. Like, what do you think was their motivation? Oh, well, they're just being stupid. Well, were they just being stupid, or do you think there's something more to it? Well, okay, well, actually, it could have been this over here, or it might have been this, or it might have been when Jamie did that, and all of a sudden, that's a critical thinking process. But you're putting it into terms which are usually, and interesting to kids,
helping
right?
Helping the children to humanize those around them a little bit too, right?
Yeah.
I have those kinds of conversations with my kids, and saying, maybe they were having a hard day, or it's not right what happened. It wasn't right what they did, but hey, maybe their parents probably talk a lot like that in front of them, or say those kinds of words. It wasn't right that they used it in front of you, but think about where they learned that from, and just trying to create an understanding where my children don't have to take it personally when somebody has a malaction towards them. Yeah. Just say, hey, this probably wasn't so much about you. It doesn't sound like, you did the wrong thing, or did you do the wrong thing? Like, let's talk about it. Yeah. And I love that. So I think a lot of times answering a question with a question to my kids, to get them to start actually thinking their own, like be able to answer their own questions, or at least start creating a dialogue in their brain. Yeah. Something else funny, I wanted to share this with you, came up. So I have my daughter enrolled in Apogee, which is Team Kennedy and Matt Boudreaux's, and it's so cool to see her flourishing in that. But they focus a lot on Socratic discussion and a lot of debate. So it's already started to work against me a little bit. But we were at home the other day, and my son, who's too young to go yet, he's like, wouldn't it be so cool if we could just spray the entire house with glitter? And I was like, what I think would be really cool is like if we could spray the TVs with glitter so we didn't watch them anymore, because I'm kind of like the anti-electronics. To a degree, time and place.
Sure.
But anyways, and Amaya sits back and she goes, Mom, I thought of a reason why we shouldn't spray the TVs with glitter. She said, because Daddy likes to watch TV and he'd be really sad if we did that.
That's great.
It is great. I mean, at 6 years old, I had to sit back and say, honey, you know what? That is a great point. I didn't think about that. You're absolutely right. I said, how about we just spray yours with glitter?
No, well, what I love about that is that it's problem solving.
Yeah.
And the problem solving is so important, because you also see parents that are constantly trying to remove any sort of obstacles whatsoever from their children's life. And it's like, you can't do that. They have to learn the way. You
breed weakness if you do that.
Yes. The way I described it to somebody, like, well, how do you differentiate between what you're trying to protect them from and what you're trying to expose them to? And I said, the best way I can describe it is, I don't protect them from the bruises in life. I do try to protect them from the scars. So if this is something that is going to do potentially lifelong damage, then I'm going to steer them away from that. If it's something where you're going to scrape up the knees a little bit trying to do that and get back up on the horse, well then sometimes I'll let them run right into that because it's important to go through, because that is life. There's one other thing I would say that's really important though. Inevitably, I think parents have an obligation to teach their children two things. The idea that there is such a thing as objective reality and objective truth, and there is such a thing as objective morality. It is not up for debate on whether or not it's okay for me to deliberately hurt somebody else because I want their bike, right? That's morally wrong. Mm-hmm. It's not about perspective. It's not your truth versus my truth. That's wrong. Now, in our family, we're Christians, so it's wrong because God says it's wrong, but we also see all the practical reasons why it's also wrong. So objective truth is the idea that no, reality is reality, and that which reflects reality is true, and your feelings and your perspective matter, but they don't trump reality. Your feelings and perspectives are supposed to be tools that you use along with your intellect and a critical thought process to better understand reality. But we don't change reality because you feel different that day. That's not how it works. So objective truth, objective morality. If you teach your kids those things, inevitably, they're going to come to you at one point where you screwed up on one of those two things. And it's probably going to be when you're stressed out and you're tired and you've been working really hard and everything else, and they're going to be right. Yep. And here's what I would say: there still is a respect factor there. Your kids still have to be respectful when they do that, but when they do and when they're right, one of the most powerful things you can do is look at them and be like, "You were right and I'm wrong, and I apologize." Because if you don't, you will think you have taught them that there is such a thing as truth. You will think you have taught them that there's such a thing as right and wrong. But in reality, what you will have taught them is an authority structure. And the authority structure says is whoever's in power gets to decide what's right or wrong at any given moment. And that might work fine when you are the authority structure. I promise you're going to have some problems with the conclusions that it yields when it's the college professor or the boss or the really bad boyfriend or the really bad girlfriend or whatever. Or even
when your kids start to become teenagers and question your authority because not feeling like you have as much authority over them. I think a lot of parents have trouble with teenagers because they've gone with this authoritarian model the whole time. You will do what I say, and it doesn't matter what you feel and whatnot.
Because we know that people are fallible. And so if a person is the authority figure, if the person is what decides what's reality and what's right or wrong, well, people fail. And why is it that your authority is better than my authority? And why is your authority over my life better than my authority over my life? So of course, if you've raised your kids, you didn't say that explicitly, but it was reflected in your actions and the way you disciplined and everything else. Well, then of course, at some point they're going to come to that conclusion and then they're going to start to throw it back in your face. Now, I will say, if you are willing to admit you're wrong though, this always blows people's minds when I tell them this. The easiest time with my kids was their teenage years. By far, it wasn't even close. Easiest time was my teenage years.
Plan on it with my kids too. When we're so close.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that there's something rooted in that love and respect, and that respect works both ways. You know, I respect my children. I respect their feelings. I take it into consideration. Boundaries are still boundaries. You know, they will have to respect. Those do not move. When it's time for bed, it's time for bed. When it's this, when there's yeses and there's nos, and there isn't an amount of crying and whining that you want another show. It's like, I told you before, we agreed on it before, you get one show, or we don't get a show before we go to school in the mornings even. And so today we had a meltdown with, with my daughter, which, she's pretty reasonable, but, today she thought she would try what her 4-year-old brother does and scream, and I just give it to me. I want it. And it's like, no, it's okay that you're upset about it too. Still love you. It's okay to be sad about it. The answer is still no, and it will not move. So she knows the respect and the boundary. She'll try to push it like all children do, but I really believe that the unconditional love and structure that I'm providing for my children, I hope and pray, but I believe more than anything that I'll also have great teenage years with my children. Yeah,
well, it is a wonderful thing where you can kind of be at that point where you can have those conversations and you enjoy talking with one another and you enjoy spending time with one another. And the thing too, I would tell the parents to encourage them on this is, we've had people before when people kind of listen to Tina and I talk about this, a lot of times like, oh, you're so lucky. Are we?
You're fortunate, but I wouldn't say lucky.
I am happy to accept blessed, sure.
Yeah, blessed,
But the way I tell people is, Tina and I both grew up in broken homes. We got married at 19 and 20. We immediately went into a profession where we had no money, could barely pay the bills. I was gone for half the time, and the divorce rate was well over...
The military.
Oh yeah, the military. Well over like 50, sometimes 60%, depending on what unit. Then we went to war, and we started having kids right before I started going to war. So now all of a sudden we're separated, we're moving, I'm gone all the time, and then coming back in, and then leaving again, and then coming back in, and she's trying to manage all of this. So none of that is ideal. None of it. And yet, it can be done. And it's not, and if you listen to Tina and I, we could write you a book on all the things we did poorly and what we should have done better and what we wish we would have done differently. The amazing part about this, and what I find so powerful about it, is not that you got to be perfect to achieve a really good outcome, but if you can really work on that idea of there is truth, there is right and wrong. I'm going to do my best to train you in that way, and I'm going to do my best to reflect it in my own life. And I want to be someone you can look up to. I want you to be someone that you can say is honorable, so that when I do tell you that that's wrong or that's right, there's a trust built. It is amazing. It's amazing how much kids will reward that. Because like I said, I can't... I can't express all the things I look back on. I feel this sense of guilt, like I should have done this better. I should have been here for this. Why did I do that? Why didn't I do this? And it's amazing how your kids will reward just that, some of those simple principles.
Yeah, I love that. You brought up Tina. I think that's a great segue, because I want to talk to you about finding that person and not just finding them, but maintaining them.
Yeah.
You know,
oh, that's good.
That's you know, it's again, it's like, you know, you can win a world title, but to like keep it.
Yeah.
That's the hard part. I mean, it's easy to fall in love.
Yeah.
It's hard to stay in love.
You know,
well, it's challenging, right?
Well, it's what it is I think it's challenging to not get comfortable and to take for granted what you have. Mm-hmm. So I always, whenever I'm talking to people, like, how do you find the one? Or someone will ask me, like, how did you know Tina was the one?
I want to know how you keep the one.
Knowing how to find the one is instrumental to keeping them.
I think that's fair to say.
So I always tell people, first and foremost, you have to marry for values. If you don't marry for values, I don't care how much physical attraction there is. I don't care how many shared interests there are. I don't care how many shared life goals there are, especially when you have kids. At some point, there will start to be existential questions about truth and right and wrong. And if you're not on the same page on truth and right and wrong, that's going to cause a lot of division between you as a married couple. It's going to cause a lot of division the moment you enter into challenges or something that's less than the ideal. And then now you're responsible for raising little people, and that's all. So values is number one. You got to have the shared worldview.
Do you have a list of like the most essential values?
The first one, and people get upset with me when I say this, but I absolutely believe it's true, is what do you think about God? Because everybody thinks something about God, even if they say he's not there, they think something about God. The reason why that's so important is because when you start to philosophically discuss things like objective right and wrong, the question of who says is pretty important. And if it's anybody other than God, then all it is utilitarianism. It's like, well, I find this to be comforting right now, so it's true. Or I find this to be practical, so it's true.
Right. What happens God if you don't finite, find it? Right?
God's final, right? Like if God says it, then it's just it is what it is, and that actually is not we think of that as limiting, but it's actually very, very freeing, because what it means is there's certain things where I don't get to tell my wife we're doing this because I say so. She can be like, no, babe, this is wrong. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right, it is wrong. And so both of us have an objective standard outside of each other that we can appeal to.
It actually takes a lot of pressure off, because you don't feel like you have to be the one to make all the decisions of right and wrong, and you don't have to hold the wheel so tightly. You know, it reminds me to like that song, Jesus Take the Wheel. Yeah. You know, it's kind of like, you know what? Yeah. I'm just, you know, and not everybody who listens to this is necessarily going to be, you know, a believer in God. But what I will say is if you have challenges in life, maybe just see what kind of relationship you could have. And that doesn't mean you have to go to church. It doesn't mean you have to, you know, but like, I do think that there's power in that. And for me, it has alleviated, you know, those points when I was low and I thought that, you know, I questioned whether I wanted to still exist or I didn't. It brought me back to the connection that I had with God. Yeah. Because I knew that there was something I didn't know. and that was okay, and that I could find my way through that if I had a little bit of trust and a little bit of faith.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think when two people don't have a shared worldview on something so fundamental, it means you already know that there's going to be division on something that is the most fundamental. And again, a lot of people look something like, I don't need God to tell me that murder is wrong. Okay, I won't get into a big philosophical debate with you. I know that people can live in a practical way but I'm just saying, it seems to play out, and there's good, deep philosophical reasons for this, that a shared worldview on that which is most fundamental is essential to a successful marriage. The second thing I would tell people is goals and expectations. Your life goals can change that time, that's fine. Actually discussing expectations with your spouse before they're your spouse is really important. Tina and I, when we were dating, talked about how many kids do you want to have? Do you want to have pets? Do you not want to have pets? Do you want to live in the city? Do you want to live in the country? Hey, I'm going to the military. What do you think about this? I would ask her, what are your expectations for me as your husband? What do you think a husband should do? And she goes, what do you think a wife should do? Again, we both grew up in broken homes. We needed to ask these questions because what we'd experienced was not the traditional model. And we wanted to base it off of our faith, and we wanted to base it off of something we thought would last. So having discussions about her telling me, her telling me when we start to have kids, I don't want to have to work outside the home. I want to be able to work inside the home. And me saying, okay, then my financial objective is to provide much to do that. I said, but what that means is we're not going to have as much money. Are you fine with that? She goes, I'm fine with that. See, there's an expectation, because if you just said, oh, I want to stay home when I have kids, but then you got used to a 2-income family for 5 years before you had kids, and now all of a sudden one of them's gone away, and you maintain the same expectation of the same living style, well, now there's a problem. So discussing those expectations are really important. Interests are nice, but you want to make sure you have some certain common interests, but that usually happens naturally, right? You want to be open to new interests. The communication part is very important. I always tell people, if you have not gotten in an argument with this person, you're probably not ready to get married. Because it means you haven't talked about things deeply enough to actually find something to where there's going to be conflict. And then you got to test how good are you guys at resolving that? Right? How good are you guys at resolving that conflict? And then the fifth one that I always tell people is, don't get physical before you get married. And I'm not, I'm not claiming to be perfect in that realm. I'm just saying that the more physical you get early on, what ends up happening is you chase the physical, and you chase the excitement of the physical, and you start ignoring red flags because you want the physical. This is especially true for guys. Yeah. So fall in love with their heart, fall in love with their soul, fall in love with their mind. The physical is going to be easy. The physical is going to be easy. Right. And it's going to be, and here's the best part, it's going to be better. Because I always joke with people, and they're like, especially in the military, talking about like, oh, casual sex. I'm like, dude, if your sex is casual, that must suck. Because like, I love my wife, right, and it ain't casual, dude. Right? Like it's awesome, right? Yeah. Because that's not just it's not just a booty call. That's the woman I love and respect, and I'm spending my life with. Like, I don't just love her body, right? Like, I am passionate about her, and she's mine, and I am hers. Right. And she doesn't have to wonder if I'm thinking about somebody else, and I don't got to wonder if she's thinking about somebody else. Like, dude, you will not replicate that in the club. That ain't happening. No. So I tell people those 5 things first, because now when you get into the maintaining part, if you have shared values, well, then you have a shared sense of morality that you're going to for when there's disagreement. If you've expressed your expectations, they might change over time. I know Tina's and mine did, but you've got a point to go back to and be like, you remember when we talked about this? Yeah, I feel like we're not doing it, or I feel like we should be doing this now. And you have a discussion. One of the things I've loved about the interest thing with my wife is like our interests have adapted over time because of our relationship. I had no interest in cooking before I got married. I like to cook because I like to cook for my family. I like to find the things that I'm kind of good at, even though she's a far superior cook. Because I also like it on times where I can tell she's tired, she's stressed, she's been dealing with a lot of stuff, and I got dinner, right? And so, and the same thing for her. There's things that she wasn't interested in before we got married, but over time, because we were involved in it, she became more interested in, and she became my confidant on those things and the things we discussed and talked about. And then on the physical side with maintaining, this is one that I think has become I think this one gets difficult for couples. I left the Army at 31, I think 31. Didn't go to the gym for like 9 years, right? It had just been a regular part of my routine. Now I always had a pretty fast metabolism, and so like it's not like, you know, I ballooned up when I was still active, but I wasn't. And then I remember hitting my 40s, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, and I was like, if I don't start making changes now, this is going to be problematic. This is going to be really problematic. And I owe this to my family to be able to produce, right? Because I'm the sole income for the family. I owe to be able to produce. I need to be healthy in order to do that. But I also owe it to my wife, right? My wife doesn't expect that I'm going to look like I did when we were 20.
Right.
I don't like try to work out or stay in shape or do things to be like attractive to my wife, so she'll love me. I know I have her love. I do it because I'm grateful I have her love.
Exactly, and you don't want to take it for granted.
Don't stop being grateful for your spouse.
Right.
The moment you stop being grateful for your spouse, and again, you're not going to keep the same level of the kind of Disney version of romance, where like the most romantic thing is sweeping you off your feet and doing X. That's romantic, no doubt, no doubt. And to the degree that you can still do them. But don't get so caught up in that. Like really focus on this idea that I am so grateful for my wife that I want to be the best I can be for her. If you don't stop doing that, where it's like, how can I be more spiritually sound for my wife? How can I be more emotionally available? How can I be more intellectually stimulating? How can I be more capable and competent for her? And how can I be more, look, I want my wife to be attracted to me. Like I want my wife to feel like, yep, that's what I get, right? I want that. And so I think if both sides are focusing on that, because you're not competing for one another's love, you have it, but you're grateful for it. I think that just goes a long way in keeping all the things that you want within your marriage interesting and fun and exciting. And yes, you're going to get to an area where there's more comfort involved because you've been with each other through everything. And that's not a diminished romance. It's a different level to it. And so embrace that for what it is. But I'm telling you right now, she bends over to pick something up, right? It's, no, that spice is still going to be there.
That women need like 15 like physical contact a day.
Yeah.
With no other expectation, just to know like that there's that connection and love. Mm-hmm. And I think that touch is very important for women. I imagine it's also important for men, but I think that kind of gratitude and love and physical touch for women is important, generally speaking.
I totally agree. I think there's plenty of empirical data to back that up, and then I also see it on a personal level, just with my own relationship with my wife, where I need to take the time to like hug her, or like, again,
and it's playful, right? How important do you think playful is?
So I'm actually writing this. There's so we signed a book deal a while back, and one of the things I'm writing about that is why you should flirt with your wife in front of your kids. And I said I'm not saying this to like intentionally flirt with your wife when your kids are around. I'm saying don't stop flirting with your wife just because your kids are there.
Right.
Obviously make it age appropriate, right? I said, but the reason why that's so important is for two reasons. One, I want my wife to know that as far as I'm concerned, she's always got it, right? She has always got it, and I'm always going to want it, right? So I want her to know that, because it's true, and some of that playfulness is important for that. Every once in a while, it's funny. I will, like I was joking with Tina the other day, something came up about like objectifying, a person, and Tina's like, would you want to be objectified? I said, oh boy, could you? That would be awesome. Like, I would, honey, you can objectify me anytime you want. But I would say for her, it's knowing that I still want her, I still desire her. Guys want to know the same thing from their wives. We want our wives to have it bad for us, right? And that's important. And in the day-to-day, getting everything done and the whole deal, and and whatnot. It can be, I think sometimes that can be forgotten, that no, guys, we want to be desired. We don't want to just be appreciated or admired and respected. We want those things. We desperately want those things. We also want to be desired by our wives. And when we feel desired by our wives, it's a game changer for us. It's a game changer for us. But the other reason why I think it's important when you have kids is, I'll never forget one of my kids telling me that, a friend of theirs said, I love that your mom and dad flirt with each other. You can just tell they love each other. And when your kids can tell that mom and dad love each other, that means that the marriage is safe. Or it's a very good indicator that the marriage is safe. And if the marriage is safe, the family's safe. If the family's safe, the kids are safe. And it not only gives them a sense of security when mom and dad love each other, it also gives them an expectation for what a good relationship looks like. And that's really important. That's really important. So yeah, I think the playfulness is, so.
It's very important.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think that that's something when you have small kids and so many moving parts and, whatever, at least I'm speaking in my personal experience, that can be forgotten because you get so busy and you get kind of in this like working cycle where you're working together, and that gets hard. So I think like just last night I was like, Johnny, come here. I was like, come here. And I was taking like a little spatula and I was at the sink and I had water in it. My kids were over the counter the way, and they were watching TV and they were just like on their little, and so I was like flicking water over at them. And he's like, and Daxton turns, Mommy, it's raining in here, and it was so funny. And we were just enjoying that together, So I think even those moments wherever you can have a laugh together, even if it's just in a brief moment of time where you can share that. Yeah. There's one more thing that I wanted to ask you, and I think it's important, and you kind of touched on it earlier about women, I think, understanding what men also need or what is difficult. And I think you could take this any direction, so I'll leave the floor open. It can be pertaining to relationship, or it could just be what it's like to be a man today, what the challenges are, to help understand, maybe, help us as women who operate with and next to and, in relationships with men, because we get a lot of, and I'm not opposed to this at all. I mean, there's a lot of pro women, let's raise women up, let's give them equal opportunities. And I think that that's great. However, I can't help but feel like we don't see men's only gyms. We don't see men's only, areas of support. I feel like there's a big disconnect on men being able to feel safe and talking about their feelings and these things, right? Yeah. And that they're either too masculine, and there's this kind of talk around toxic masculinity. And I have my thoughts on that, but. And then there's not masculine enough to where it's not attractive, and I think that's got to be a bit confusing and difficult for men. Yeah. So I guess what I'm asking is like for some guidance in a woman. What does a man need in support, or what does a man could we help, or what could we understand about what it's like? Sure,
I think so. A man that. Whenever we talk about masculinity and femininity, we're talking about a series of traits. If you think about what every man hears typically when he hears "be a man" is put aside your issues and go contend with that which causes fear or discomfort or whatever else it might be. Get your job done, keep your word. So the whole idea, the whole concept wrapped up in this idea of "be a man" is sacrifice and overcome difficult challenges in order to fulfill your word and to conduct yourself honorably. And what that typically means is when we look at masculine traits, we tend to be more aggressive, we tend to be more competitive. We tend to have different roles within society when it comes to protection, when it comes to providing and things like that. And that requires certain things of us. You also see that men are usually more interested in things and women are usually more interested in people. That's sometimes conveyed in a way to think that men are shallow, and it's not that men don't care about people. It's that we see our job as protecting and providing for people as being focused on the things that we have to do in order to achieve that. It is almost impossible for a man to feel love if he doesn't feel respect. In fact, give a man love without respect, as anyone other than his mother when he's very, very little. And it's going to feel like pity. And most men, more than anything else, do not want to be pitied. We'd rather crawl across broken glass than to be seen as an object of pity. What that means is then we have to do the things worthy of respect. And that comes with being capable, that comes with being strong, that comes with being competent. What I would tell women, if you want to understand something about men who are trying to achieve that, because there's some men that have bought into this idea that you don't want that from us anymore. And what we're all ended up finding out is that the men who don't embrace masculinity and really try to live out the truest form of it, they're not happy and they're weak and they're not respected. And oh, by the way, women don't like them. So it turns out women don't like, and when I say women, I don't want to be overgeneralized here, but when it comes to like third wave feminist culture, they're creating men they don't even like. What a shocker. So men do want to be loved. We do want to be respected. We deal with our feelings differently. It's not that we don't have them. They usually manifest a little bit differently because men do not want to be perceived as being weak, and because many of the responsibilities associated with being a man means that we have to compartmentalize our emotions in order to get something done in the moment. Sometimes it can be very, very hard to go back to that box where the emotions are and fully flesh that out. And if we do, we don't want to do it in an environment where we feel weak. The other thing I would say is that I think my wife has always done an incredible job of understanding when I'm processing something, and I'm happy to talk with her about things. Can I also say this? There are some burdens that I carry that are supposed to be mine. They're not hers. And I don't have a right to throw those burdens onto her in order to help emotionally fix that. Now, I feel confident that I could share anything with my wife and whatnot, but there's certain things that I'm supposed to do as a man. And a lot of it is that I don't need time to talk about my feelings as long as I know I'm appreciated for carrying that burden. There was one time my wife came up to me and she just said, I need you to know, like, you do a good job providing and protecting this family. I feel safe with you. Holy crap. Dude, I could go on that compliment for another year, right? Just right there. She wasn't asking me, like, do you need to sit down and discuss your feelings about protecting and fighting, or anxieties around the job, or the last thing we got to do? We're like, no, it was, I want you to know that I feel safe because of you. We're good. Where's the next wall I got to run through? Yeah. Let's do this thing. We got a dragon to slay. Let's go slay him. I don't need the sword. I got it. Right? Like, that's a part of what it is. Right? Is acknowledging that they exist. Yeah. There will be times. One of the things that we've seen with a lot of combat veterans is a lot of the help they've tried to give combat veterans has been rooted in this idea of, we're going to make you feel supported. In part because typically when women are dealing with stress, women want to feel supported and they want to feel encouraged. Men want to feel capable. We want to feel that we can overcome this. We can get through this. This is why when you see men motivating other men, it's like, get off your ass and let's go do this thing. It's not, hey buddy, we're all here for it. Like, that's not the way we do it. And I don't think it's, good or bad. I think it's different with respect to what we need. So please understand that a lot of the things that we do that may seem emotionally distant, and we do got to get better at that. But part of it is rooted in this compartmentalization that takes place with our intense need and desire to be able to not just protect and provide, because it's not like we see women as our children that we got to protect and provide for. In many cases, you're the thing we live up to. Like, we are trying to be that man that we think you can be proud of and in love with, and the whole deal. There's this saying that has really fallen out of favor, but it was the idea that men civilize the wilderness and women civilize men. I think there's a lot of truth to it. There is, I am so much, I cannot imagine the version of the man I would be without my wife. I hope it would still be a good one. I can't imagine it being a better one than what I am. And a lot of that is about wanting to be someone that she can be proud of. So that when we know our wives are proud of us, man, that goes a long way. And when it does come to sharing things that we're struggling with or or whatnot, what I would say is, if we do share something and it gets used against us later, we ain't going to do it again. So it has to be something to where if it is safe to talk to you, then it's got to be safe to talk to you. It's got to be safe to be like, yeah, I'm really stressed out about that. But the moment I say I'm stressed out about something, if all of a sudden, well, now I'm stressed out about it. All right, never mind, I got it. So that's a difficult balancing act, right? What burdens do I share with my wife that are appropriate to share with my wife, and which ones are just going to cause her additional stress and I have to carry? And then the other thing I would say too, for both men and women, there's always going to be times where you talk to somebody other than your spouse about something you're struggling or dealing with. I will always say this though, my wife is my confidant. That doesn't mean I won't have a good talk with my buddy Nate or whatnot, but it is never to the detriment of my wife, right? I do not talk trash about my wife. If it's not like a funny stereotypical joke I would tell right there in front of her, then nope. I hate it. The whole locker room talk thing where I hate it, where guys like send around and like bash their wives. I hate that crap. So that when I go to talk to somebody about an issue I'm dealing with or something I'm struggling with, whatever else, it has to be someone that is dedicated to my marriage succeeding, not somebody that's just going to be like, whatever. And
Right.
she's got to do the same thing, right? She's got to talk to somebody about that is going to be is dedicated to a marriage, because ultimately, one of the beautiful things about marriage, it's not advertised this way anymore, but one of the beautiful things about marriage is there is no just me or just her anymore. There's us. And it doesn't mean we're not both, we're still our own person, sure. But I signed up for us,
Yeah.
right? I wasn't forced into us. I signed up for that. I wanted that. I still want that. And part of my job is to make sure that she knows that that's always my objective. And she does the same thing for me. And the way she does that is by not just telling me she loves me, but by showing me respect for the things that I'm worthy of respect, and letting me know that she's still very proud of me. So
That's great. So it's very eye-opening, and I think I'm going to go home, give Johnny a big hug, and tell him I appreciate all the things that he does for our family, because you're spot on. I think that is important, and I think it cannot be overemphasized how important that is both ways in a relationship. The love and respect and communication and the appreciation and the gratitude. So, speaking of gratitude, I'm so thankful that you came today. This was a phenomenal podcast. Can't wait to share it with the listeners. So,
well, thank you very much for having me.
I
really
appreciate you.
it.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks.
The Built for Growth podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have, and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Our content may include sponsorship and affiliate links through which we earn a small commission on sales made through those links.